Hi everyone, David Aragona here with the September 25th edition of Horses to Watch, taking a look at last week's races at Belmont at the Big A. 4 racing days, Thursday through Sunday from this past week, and we're going to take a look at 3 replays in total from 2 of those days, a couple from the Thursday, September 19th card, and one from Sunday, September 22nd. Let's begin with a couple of those races from Thursday. Both of these are turf races, one on the inner turf, the other on the outer turf, and I'll say the rail settings were 18 feet on the inner, 36 feet on the outer. The latter of those, one that's rarely used. And I think we saw some interesting results, maybe some results that I personally found surprising in a few of these turf races from last week. So maybe the rail settings messed with the competition a little bit. So I think you'd want to take the performances in some of these races with a grain of salt. It seemed like there were some horses that maybe weren't handling the turf course last week. But we're going to talk about a couple of horses that actually ran pretty well with some trips that were difficult. Let's begin with the 7th race from Thursday. It's an optional claiming $50,000 with a starter allowance, $35,000 condition attached to it. Mile and a 16th on that inner turf course. We'll break these runners from the gate, focusing on the number 9, Heath Guard. And this is a horse who has been pretty unlucky with the trips. I don't think I've done him on Horses to Watch before, but he's been a candidate for a few prior shows because he's gotten wide trips on a number of occasions throughout the spring and summer of this year. And now into fall, yet another difficult wide trip for Heath Guard. And you can kind of see it unfolding through the early stages of this race. He breaks from post 9 and he gets over to the 3 path heading into the clubhouse turn. And that's not an ideal position to be in. Even though the rails were out, it still felt like inside position was what you wanted to go for on these turf courses, especially the inner turf course. And you could see Heath Guard was actually pushed out into about the 4 path for a little while around that clubhouse turn. And now moving on to the backstretch, the pace starts to back down in front, and the jockey, having no cover on the outside, can't seem to prevent the horse from moving forward. He gets pushed out into the 4 or 5 path here with nobody ahead of him, and just ends up making this premature move, going from about 8th or 9th place all the way up into 3rd by the time they're going to head into the far turn, and still is not able to get over to get any kind of inside position. Now 3 wide for the run around the far turn, and considering this trip, he actually does pretty well to stay on through the wire. This was a race that was won by the number 10 Born Dancer, who is a horse who had plenty of back class. He was taking a drop in class into this race and was just a little superior to his rivals. The number 4, David Jacobson trainee, who got a good rail trip, also runs well in this race. And I think you want to note the horses that got good trips either forward or towards the inside, because Heath Guard was able to do none of those things, having to make that move from towards the back of the pack and go wide around both turns. It's remarkable that this horse is still in the mix at the 8th pole here, trying to get into the money. He's ultimately going to fade a little bit to lose this race by 1.5 lengths, but considering that the margin of defeat at the finish line was just under 2 lengths, I think he certainly lost more ground than that around both turns. So I think you could make the argument that even though Born Dancer was that class dropper, Heath Guard might have been the horse that ran the best race of anybody in here. And it's not the first time that he's been severely compromised by a wide trip. So I think when this horse runs back, hopefully getting in one more start before the fall season is over, he's one that can definitely do better if he can finally draw a post position that is closer towards the rail. Let's move on to another turf race from this September 19th card on Thursday. The 9th race of the day was a maiden special weight going 6 furlongs for the 2-year-old fillies on the outer turf course. And like I said, the rail all the way out at that rarely used 36-foot position. We'll break these runners from the gate. We're going to focus on the number 3, Bossy Pants. And she breaks a little slowly. You can see her in those blue silks towards the back of the pack. And one caveat here, this is the 3rd start of her career, and Bossy Pants has broken slowly every single time. So this is just kind of a habit that she has. But notice here, she tries to move up between horses, making up for that slow start, and she's going to get squeezed out of position right there. You can see the jockey has to pull back and check on her. So broke slowly, tried to move up, but was thwarted there, and then loses position and momentum down the backstretch. And from here, the pace is starting to slow down. The eventual winner is the number 4, Miriam Fire, who is setting that controlled pace up front. So this race is not unfolding in a scenario that is going to be favorable to Bossy Pants. You can see here, Junior Alvarado does really the only thing he can, trying to advance, but he has to go very wide in doing so, out in the 4 path, trying to make the widest run around the far turn. That's just not a winning trip in a race where you brake slowly, where there's not a whole lot of pace up front. So you're making a move at a portion of the race where the leader is actually getting a breather. And unsurprisingly, her progress is going to stall in the stretch. But I still think that Bossy Pants does pretty well to get up for third in this race, actually edging out the heavy favorite Bourbon Milk Punch, who took a lot of money in here. And this race was just dominated on the front end by a couple of horses who had inside position and forward position in a race where they came home very quickly. The final quarter mile of this race by the winner was recorded in 22.4 seconds. It's really hard to close into that kind of pace. And I will say you might want to take some of these times on the outer turf course, especially with a grain of salt. With the rails out that far, it's harder for the beams to capture accurate times with the horses for the teletimer. So we saw some wacky times on the turf this week. So I think maybe you want to take those with a little bit of skepticism, but still, it was apparent from the way this race unfolded that they slowed down in the middle portion, and Bossy Pants really had no chance to make up further ground after getting that wide trip and having that slow early start. So she's a horse that has some talent, but I just want to pump the brakes a little bit, because she does have to get out of the gate better if she's going to have success in the future, or find herself in a situation where the pace does come apart enough for her to be successful. Let's move on to the Sunday card at Aqueduct. This is September 22nd, the fourth race of the day. It's a New York bred maiden claiming race, $30,000, the price tag, going 1 mile on the dirt course. Let's break these runners from the gate and focus on the number 5, Stanley Ruff. And you could see in those yellow Michael Dub silks, he actually breaks with the pack. It wasn't really a slow break, but he's just the kind of horse that doesn't seem to like racing in and amongst horses. And you could see once the field starts to come over on him, the leaders converge, and he starts to take some of that kickback, he just takes himself out of the race here. And you could see Ramiro Mirage, his jockey, is trying to motivate him to hold this position, but the horse just can't do so. And he's just kind of sulking and dropping back through the pack. And he's going to ultimately wind up behind the rest of the field. And the other horse are just going to get away from him. And he's going to become disconnected from the pack, multiple lengths behind the second to last runner, has moved down the backstretch. And it's not the first time we've seen this horse do this. So he's got to get over this problem where he just doesn't want to race in the pack of horses and takes himself out of the race and then does some running at the end. And that's exactly what we're going to see him do here. And I kind of worry that maybe this is just a characteristic of the progeny of Salamini, because I've been noticing a lot of Salamini's runners race like this, where they just don't seem to disengage from the field. They don't seem to like the kickback or throw a little green during the race. And Stanley Ruff definitely seems to be in that mold. He's got a big, long stride to him. He seems like a horse that really wants to go this distance, but you can't win going this distance when you take yourself out of the race in the early stages the way that he did. Now, he's going to actually do some running in the stretch here. You could see he had to alter course a little bit at the top of the stretch. He is completely covered in dirt, as kickback did seem like it was a real issue for really the entire week at Aqueduct, but especially on this Sunday card where we saw speed dominate. And Stanley Ruff is going to do well here to get up into 5th by the time they cross the wire, actually gallop out strongly past the wire, almost up to the winner by the time they get to the clubhouse turn. But like I said, he's a horse that needs to learn how to run a more complete race if he is going to have success. I think this was now the 5th start of his career, and he's still not getting over it. I'm looking for Rick Dutcher to add blinkers next time to maybe get this horse a little more engaged from the start of his race. But he's another one that I think you want to proceed with a little bit of caution, because while this was a trip that I think you do want to take a look at of horses that were behind and trying to make up ground on Sunday, I do think they were compromised. But Stanley Ruff might be a horse that really needs blinkers or an outside post position to be successful, so he's not getting discouraged racing inside of horses. And just to comment a little further on what was going on that Sunday card at Aqueduct, there were 5 dirt races. All of them were dominated by front runners, and not just horses winning on the front end, but horses that were opening up large margins by the time they got to the finish line. Actually, this 4th race that we watched was the most competitive of all the dirt races, with the winning margin only being 3/4 of the length, but there was still a big gap behind the top 2 finishers. You could argue that maybe the rail was the place to be, because most of the horses, I think actually all the horses that were successful, rode the rail, but there weren't horses making up ground from behind riding the rail. It just felt like the horses that got in front widened their advantage. There really was no running going on from the back of the pack in almost every race of the day. So I think you do want to upgrade a performance of a horse like Stanley Ruff and just be a little forgiving of some horses that were beaten by large margins on this Sunday, September 22nd card, because it really did seem like if you weren't in front, towards the inside, you had little chance to be successful on last Sunday. So those are all the horses to watch from this past week. If you want to follow any of these horses moving forward, as I always say, you can add them to your horse watch on DRF.com and get email notifications when these horses run back in the future. But also go into your Timeform US or DRF Formulator subscriptions in your past performances. When you open up the charts, you can add notes in the PPs, and those notes that you make about these horses' trips will show up in the running lines of your past performances when these horses are entered back in the future. That's a way that I like to keep track of these trips moving forward. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to another edition of Horses to Watch. I'll be back with another batch of replays to look at next week.